I mean, people might not like your murder parasite house from which you taped the podcast, but like some people might like it. So.
Hello and welcome to this late night reaction edition of the 538 Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk. We've just wrapped up the fourth and final night of the Republican National Convention, capping off 2 weeks of conventions. We did it. Whew. I'm sure everyone is tired. We'll try to keep it short tonight. President Trump formally accepted the party's renomination for president. It was a prepared 5,680 words long, making it the second longest convention speech by an incumbent since World War II. It was a wide-ranging speech touching on lots of different policies, which we can get into. It was also preceded by a speech from Ivanka Trump, his daughter, of course, aimed at softening the president's image. So let's discuss it all. Here with me to do that, our editor-in-chief, Nate Silver. Hey, Nate.
Wait, they're related? Ivanka and Donald?
I know. I just wanted to make sure that I clarified who exactly Ivanka Trump was for anybody who might be confused, whatever.
I believe her real name is Ivana, but Ivanka is a diminutive.
Really?
Fun
know
fact.
Yeah.
Dropping some knowledge.
Isn't
didn't know
her
that
mom's
either.
name Ivana?
Correct.
Oh,
The first two children are named for the parents.
I like that name, Ivana.
Interesting.
Well, you can name a
as
child
you've heard, senior politics writer Claire Malone is also with us. Hey, Claire.
Hi, Galen.
And managing editor Micah Cohen. Hey, Micah.
Hey, Galen.
So we are going to have, of course, a podcast out this coming Monday, and we can review some more of what happened at the conventions and whether or not we've seen any movement in the polls since. So we'll try to keep things kind of concise this evening, but I just want to hear, as I mentioned, it was a very long speech, touched on a lot of different things. What were your general takeaways from the evening? Micah, kick us off.
I think my takeaway is that these conventions will go down as being largely not influential on the campaign and not one of the more kind of memorable convention sets in election history, modern campaign history. Nothing particularly stood out in either convention, and I would include Trump's speech tonight. It actually was a fairly boilerplate, lots of people were saying, and I agree, kind of State of the Union-y speech. Like a State of the Union speech, I think in terms of policies, but also in terms of lines of attack on Biden. You saw just the Trump campaign throwing a lot against the wall. It was kind of all over the place. So for someone like me who's mostly interested in okay, what can we learn from this about the party and about how the Trump campaign is going to pursue the rest of the campaign, I don't know. I came away pretty confused.
I want better writing for the American people. Policies aside, which I'm sure we'll talk about. It was just a terribly written speech. I think calling it like a State of the Union speech is even giving it too much credit. It's hard to write long. You need structure. The piece had no structure. There were no core thematic elements. It was not engaging. It was not engagingly delivered. It was a poor ending to a otherwise fine night of television. But I think overall, I'm glad that these conventions were revelatory about the empty form that is the American political convention. We saw.
Go, Claire, go
for the jugular, Claire.
No, it's true. We saw what it is, which is an infomercial on both sides, and it was in some ways. I think people deserve to, as we discussed on previous podcasts, see the way that the parties think of themselves. But ultimately, I'm not sure that they are particularly useful as 8 nights of television viewing for people. That's it.
Thanks for joining us. Leave a review and a rating on iTunes. There was a long pause, Nate, for you to jump in.
I think it was boring. It's the headline. It was freaking boring, Trump's speech. It could not pick a theme, which, Mike, as you were saying, is a little bit interesting given that there's not that much longer to go in the campaign. We're going from early to late in a hurry here. They're kind of still doing the grab bag and laundry lists of positive arguments and negative arguments, right? To Claire's point, they kept kind of circling back. It kind of really feels like when you're walking around some trails or driving around into a city you don't know, where you're like, oh, I remember that 7-Eleven from before, right? We saw that before, not from the same angle, but we saw that before, and that laundromat and whatever else. Like, I think it was like kind of an almost like inexplicable anticlimax. You know what I mean? Like what?
Well, maybe especially compared to 2016, right, where we had "I am your voice, I alone can fix it."
I think you're
about
vastly overrating how effective his 2016 speech was, which he got very little convention bounce out of, right? But it's just like there is no reason not to pare this down, right? Because it didn't even like make the same. I mean, they were being repetitive. It wasn't even like they said like a long laundry list. They were saying everything twice. And they were saying everything and saying it twice. And so, like, I don't know. I mean, look, I thought the kind of non-primetime hour was actually pretty good tonight. I thought Alice Johnson was good. I think it's maybe cynical, but probably smart to feature a lot of everyday Americans and non-white speakers. I think the elected officials, except for Nikki Haley and Tim Scott on night one. And Pence was actually fine last night. But they were mostly pretty boring. Tom Cotton, I don't really see that charisma factor. People think he's a 2024 nominee, right?
I think before Trump got up to speak, it was the theme that I could generally glom together was America's cities are burning. America's cities are run by Democrats. Democrats are bad for America. Look, all of these people of color are speaking to us about how bad their lives are in Democratic cities. Okay. That was the pre-Trump thing. I think the Trump, like, to go back to the comparison of Trump in 2016 and Trump in 2020, I was slacking Micah a little bit about this. I think that Trump in 2016 was so new and to many people alarming and unconventional that even if, we viewed his 2016 speeches in 2020 and we might think they were kind of like, oh, it's more of the same. When we saw them, like, I remember being in that convention hall in Cleveland and being like, what just happened? That was kind of crazy. He said, I alone can fix this. I remember being struck by that. And tonight, again, it was long, but I think some of it is also we have not tuned out, but it's just become so repetitive, the kind of things that he says, that even if he had like a couple of lines that were like supposed to zing, in part, yes, he should have cut all the chaff around the wheat, but we're used to it. It's lost some of its impact.
There's very little here that you don't see on a daily basis in the president's Twitter feed.
Right.
Like I do not think it would have been wise for the president to just have ad-libbed for an hour. It would have been more interesting and had more upside, I suppose, right? But like, it's just kind of strange. I mean, I think you can compare the conventions. I think one thing Democrats did effectively is like they kept things pretty short and tight. They may be at a disadvantage because their convention was more virtual than the GOP's. We haven't talked yet, I'm sure we will, everybody, about like the setting at the White House, which is striking in several different meanings of that term, right? But I don't know. I mean, this is not a campaign that is confident about its strategy. I agree with Claire that like if you pare it down, then the theme is kind of there are all these Democrat-run cities that are burning and Trump will restore order. There wasn't that much about Biden. There was some stuff, right? But like you have to do some work to drill down into that theme. You have to drill some work. I guess if you want to say what attack was the most consistent on Biden, it was more like he's a Trojan horse for Bernie and AOC, but you have to do some work to drill that down.
Let me kind of halfway play devil's advocate here.